In this episode, we're going to build a beginner-friendly mental model for one of the most important ideas in cybersecurity. The reason layered defenses are more reliable than any single control, no matter how impressive that control seems. People new to security often search for a magic solution, like one amazing firewall, one perfect password rule, or one brilliant monitoring tool that will keep everything safe. That desire makes sense because it matches how we often think about safety in everyday life, where one strong lock or one alarm can feel like enough. In cybersecurity, though, attackers have choices, systems have flaws, people make mistakes, and environments change, which means no single control stays perfect for long. Defense in depth is the approach that accepts those realities and builds protection by stacking multiple types of safeguards so that if one fails, others still reduce damage. Once you internalize this way of thinking, you stop hunting for silver bullets and start designing security as a resilient system. A good place to start is defining defense in depth, DID, in plain language, because the phrase can sound abstract until you connect it to a simple idea. Defense in depth is the practice of using multiple, different security controls that work together so that one weakness does not become a total failure. The keywords are multiple and different. Multiple means you do not rely on a single point of failure, like one password, one network filter, or one approval step. Different means you diversify the kinds of protection you use, because a control that stops one kind of problem might not stop another. For example, an access control rule might prevent unauthorized actions, while logging might detect suspicious behavior that still slips through, and backups might reduce impact if data is lost anyway. The concept is less about piling on random controls and more about building a series of obstacles and safety nets that make attacks harder, slower, and less successful. To understand why layers beat a single perfect control, it helps to think about what makes controls fail in the first place. Controls fail because they are built by humans, configured by humans, maintained by humans, and used by humans, and humans are not perfect. A control can also fail because the environment changes, like when new software is deployed, network paths change, or new users are added quickly. Sometimes controls fail because they are bypassed, not broken, such as when someone finds an alternate route that was not considered, or when a legitimate account is misused. And sometimes controls fail because they become noisy or inconvenient, leading people to weaken them over time, like turning off security settings to get work done faster. Even the strongest cryptography does not help if keys are mishandled, and even the best detection does not help if nobody responds. Defense in depth assumes failure is possible and plans for it, instead of betting everything on perfection. Another beginner misconception is thinking defense in depth means adding more controls always makes security better. Layers help when they are chosen intentionally, but too many controls can create confusion, gaps, and maintenance problems. The value comes from complementary coverage, not just volume. Complementary coverage means different controls address different stages of an attack, different types of mistakes, and different parts of the system. For example, one layer might reduce the chance of an attacker getting in, another might reduce what they can do if they get in, another might help you notice something is wrong, and another might help you recover. When you design layers this way, you improve reliability the same way engineers improve reliability in other complex systems. You use redundancy, diversity, and controlled failure modes. A well-layered design makes attacks more expensive and reduces the chance that one oversight becomes a disaster. It also helps to see defense in depth as a response to the attacker's advantage in choosing where to strike. Attackers do not have to attack the strongest point. They can look for the weakest point. If you build one perfect control at the perimeter but ignore weak internal accounts, sloppy permissions, or unpatched systems, you have effectively created a single door with a giant lock but left open windows everywhere else. Attackers are opportunistic, and many real incidents start with something small, like a reused password, a phishing message, or a misconfigured service, not with a dramatic high-tech breakthrough. Layers shrink the set of easy options available to an attacker. Even if one weak point exists, other layers can still slow the attacker down, create evidence of their actions, and limit what they can reach. That is why layered defenses are not only about blocking. They are also about shaping the battlefield in your favor. Let's break layers into categories, because beginners often assume layers only mean network devices, when the concept is much broader. One category is physical controls, like limiting access to devices and infrastructure, because someone with physical access can often bypass logical controls. Another category is administrative controls, which are policies, training, procedures, and accountability mechanisms that guide behavior and reduce risky actions. A third category is technical controls, like authentication, authorization checks, encryption, network filtering, and monitoring. You do not need to memorize categories to understand the point, but it helps to see that defense in depth includes people and process, not just technology. For example, requiring multi-factor authentication is technical, but teaching users to recognize phishing is administrative, and requiring badge access to a server room is physical. When these work together, the overall system becomes harder to compromise. A crucial idea is that layers can be placed at different points in a system, not just at the edge. In older mental models, people imagine a strong perimeter and a trusted interior, but modern environments are messy, distributed, and interconnected. You can have cloud services, remote users, partner connections, and mobile devices, all of which blur the concept of a single perimeter. Defense in depth adapts by placing layers around identities, devices, data, applications, and networks. That means you might have controls that protect identity, like strong authentication and account review, controls that protect devices, like hardening and patching, controls that protect data, like encryption and classification, and controls that protect network paths, like segmentation and filtering. The power comes from overlapping coverage. If an attacker compromises one identity, they still face device controls and application checks. If they reach a network segment, they still face access rules and monitoring. The idea is to make compromise a journey with multiple hurdles, not a single leap. One of the best ways to internalize defense in depth is to walk through a simple attack narrative and see where layers matter. Imagine an attacker wants access to confidential data. Their first step might be getting credentials through a phishing email, which is common because it targets human behavior. A layer like user awareness reduces the chance the phishing works, and a layer like multi-factor authentication reduces the value of a stolen password. If the attacker still gets into an account, least privilege reduces what that account can access, and segmentation reduces what network areas that account can reach. If the attacker tries to move around, logging and monitoring can create visibility, and alerting can bring attention to suspicious patterns. If the attacker manages to damage or encrypt data, backups and recovery procedures reduce impact and speed up restoration. No single control is perfect, but each layer reduces probability or impact, and together they create resilience. Defense in depth also addresses the reality that security failures often come from normal work, not from villains with dramatic skills. Misconfigurations are a great example because they happen when someone sets up a system incorrectly, like leaving a service exposed or granting excessive permissions. A single perfect control cannot prevent every configuration mistake, but layers can reduce the chance and reduce the harm. Standard configurations and change reviews reduce mistakes. Access controls prevent unauthorized changes. Scanning and monitoring detect exposures, and segmentation reduces blast radius if something is exposed anyway. Even simple practices like separating environments, such as keeping development and production distinct, are a form of layering that prevents experimental changes from hitting critical systems. This is why defense in depth is not only about stopping attackers, it is also about containing accidents and managing complexity. Another important angle is that layers help you handle uncertainty, because you rarely know exactly what threats will appear or exactly how systems will behave. A single control strategy requires you to predict the future because you are betting everything on one mechanism working against all relevant threats. Layering reduces the burden of prediction by distributing protection across different approaches. If one layer is weakened by a new technique, another layer might still work because it operates differently. This is sometimes called defense by diversity, meaning you do not put all your trust in controls that fail in the same way. For instance, relying only on signatures for detection is risky if the attacker uses new methods. But combining signatures with behavior-based monitoring and strong access controls can still catch or limit the attack. The point is not to be paranoid, but to be realistic about how often surprises happen in cybersecurity. It is also worth connecting defense in depth to the idea of trade-offs, because every control has a cost, and costs include more than money. Controls can cost time, usability, performance, and operational effort. A single heavy control might create friction that leads users to find workarounds, which can undermine security. Layering can sometimes reduce friction by distributing burden. Instead of one extreme gate that blocks everything, you can use moderate controls at multiple points, creating security that is strong without being unbearable. For example, you might not want every action to require heavy authentication prompts, but you can require stronger checks for sensitive actions, add monitoring for anomalies, and limit access through least privilege. The result is a system that is both safer and more usable. A layered approach can be designed to protect what matters most while letting routine work flow normally. A final misconception to clear up is the idea that defense in depth is only for large organizations with big budgets. The concept applies at any scale because it is about thinking in layers, not buying expensive products. Even a small environment can layer controls with smart choices. Strong authentication is one layer. Keeping software updated is another. Using least privilege is another. And having reliable backups is another. Simple network segmentation or separating critical data from general use systems is another layer. Training and clear procedures for handling suspicious messages is another layer. None of these require a massive security team, but together they reduce the chance that one mistake leads to total loss. Beginners often underestimate how much security comes from consistent basics, because basics are not glamorous, but they are effective, especially when they reinforce each other. By now, the central message should feel less like a slogan and more like a practical strategy. Layers beat single, perfect controls because the real world is unpredictable. Systems fail, humans err, and attackers adapt. Defense in depth is not about piling on random barriers. It is about designing complementary protections that reduce both the chance of compromise and the damage if compromise occurs. When one layer fails, another can still slow the attacker, reveal their actions, or contain impact, and that resilience is exactly what you want in security. If you train yourself to think in layers, you start asking better questions, like what happens if this control fails? What is the blast radius? How will we detect trouble? And how will we recover? Those questions create strong security thinking, and they set you up to understand many other topics in this course, because layered defense is a foundation that connects to access control, network security, incident response, and governance. Once you truly internalize defense in depth, you stop chasing perfect and start building resilient.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.